we shall go direct into introducing ourselves, and then we begin because time is not on our side. So as we introduce yourself, you just say your name and how you have been this far. So I'll start with myself, then I'll give the next person. So my name is Jolie Oyaro. I'm currently the program officer at Nzumari, Africa. And we currently run a mental health project in form of a youth gathering space where young people come to engage with their peers, get mental health literacy, and also psychosocial support. We are based at St. Daniel Komboni, Huruma. For the new members here, that is what we are currently doing. So I'll pass it to the next person, who is Collins.
Recording in
Collins, if you can hear me.
Can I use the chat box?
Sawa sawa. And then I'll pass it on to Eric. Okay, Raymond, if you can hear us.
Raymond Mwega, Program Manager, Nzumari, Africa.
Euphemia.
Hi, na nimejoin sahi, tunafanya kama tunajibu.
We are introducing ourselves.
Oh, my name is Euphemia King. Oh, yeah.
Okay, next is Musa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Musa Baraza, currently the chair, Nzumari, Africa.
Kevin.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Oyugi Obuma, participant.
Thank you, Kevin. Eric, if you can hear us, I think you're the only, oh, okay. Eric has introduced himself in the chat box. So as we wait for more people to join, today we are going to talk about boundaries, and you'll allow me to share my screen. But before I share my screen, maybe someone can tell us what they think boundaries is. When you hear the word boundary, what comes into your mind?
I think boundaries are the set, like a space in which you have allocated for yourself and maybe for people around you. So it's like a buffer zone that you put around yourself.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Anyone else? Yes, Kevin, you can go next.
Boundary is mainly like a limit of an area, limit of an area of an operation.
Okay, thank you, Kelvin. Anyone else before I start sharing my screen? Okay. Does my voice have a feedback right now, Raymond? Kindly confirm for me. Or it's okay?
No, now you're good. Now
Okay.
you're good.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll share my screen. So boundaries are your own personal limits and guidelines and can be considered as a gentle partition between our needs and the needs of others. So in short, boundaries is what we take as our personal limits, and it's the space we create between us and someone else, or it could be between us and maybe something else. So setting and sustaining boundaries is a skill and a critical one. And boundaries give us permission to say no to things that we don't wish to do and that make us uncomfortable or impact on our self-esteem. So boundaries allow you as a person to say no to something. And also it impacts on our self-esteem. Setting boundaries allows us to remain true to ourselves and our ethical beliefs. So maybe from that introduction part, so what are some of the type of boundaries that exist that we know of? Any types of boundaries that we've set for ourselves to help us like maintain our own personal limits and give us our self-esteem? So examples of boundaries maybe from the participants.
I think an example of boundaries that is not personal per se is like the how Kenya is shaped. Like we have boundaries, we have borders. We also have county borders, so you know when you are moving from one county to another, you know when you're moving from Kenya to another country. And so an example of personal boundary will be boundary between a parent and a child. Like there are things a child will not say to a parent. There are things a child will not do in front of a parent. At least kitambo, siku hizi ni kama watu walitoshana. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you so much, Raymond. Anyone else? Eric says emotional boundaries. This pertains to the level of connection and trust with different people. Thank you so much, Eric. Any other example of a boundary that we know of? Musa?
Boundary tuseme ni kama kwa manyumba, yeah? Whereby ni ploti ni moja yet kila mtu ako na nyumba yake. So whatever happens in your house is yours in your own boundaries. Whatever na happen kwa nyumba ya mtu mwingine ni yake na ni boundary yake. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Musa. And of course that touches to somehow physical boundaries. Like kila mtu ako na nyumba yake, so everyone has rules for their own home. Anyone else? So I'll share the types of boundaries that are there. So we have physical, and this refers to your own personal space, your privacy, and your body. So you might be someone who is comfortable with public displays of affections. That could be hug, holding hands, or you might be someone who prefers not to be touched in public. So that depends on the boundary you've set and also the kind of relationship you have with someone to allow them into your space. So when you feel your personal space is being violated, this can make you feel uncomfortable and anxious. Being clear and firm about what is allowed in your physical space can be the difference between you feeling safe or not. So in short, in terms of physical boundaries, this is now our personal space. And in most times, you define your own personal space. Maybe personally me, naeza kubali anyone ani hug, but we have those people who only hug specific people within their surrounding. It could be their friends, it could be their significant other, it could be their family members. Past that, they are not able to interact comfortably with those around them. It could be a colleague, anaweza choose asihug colleague wake, anaweza choose asimsalimia hata kwa mkono, because we also have those people who don't even greet people na mkono. So that is on physical boundaries. Sijui kama kuna mtu ako na any addition on physical boundary ama mchangio yoyote before we move to the next. So I assume to may understand what physical boundaries mean. So the next one we have sexual, and this can be your expectations concerning intimacy, sexual comments, and touches, which might be uncomfortable for you. So most times, especially nowadays, unapata most people, in terms of sexual relationships, it's like people don't define their boundaries really well. So you find if maybe your boyfriend assumes that because you are the girlfriend, then he has authority over your body or he has authority over you. So they might take advantage of you sexually with the belief that they are your boyfriend. So it is important to also be very firm in terms of sexual boundaries. It's important to communicate what types of maybe gestures you want as a partner, or rather what intimacy means to you, because in some relationship, intimacy could just mean hugging, laughing with each other, talking, but in some relationships, intimacy or rather sexual relationship could mean now the sexual bit of it, like now having sex with your partner. And it's unfortunate that because of people not defining their boundaries, especially when it comes to sexual boundaries, nowadays we have intimate partner violations. In terms of sexual violation, we have rape. You find that your boyfriend or your girlfriend has raped you because you never defined your sexual boundaries, or they just take advantage of your sexual boundaries. So I don't know if someone has an addition on that before we move on when it comes to sexual boundaries. Leo tumenyamaza sana, tujisikii kuongea.
I have like a concern, especially when it comes to the physical and sexual boundaries. It seems like people do not believe that women can wanaweza vuka mpaka when it comes to something sexual. When people talk about intimate partner violence, when people talk about issues of physical violence, mostly a lot of people just think this is men doing something to women. And when it comes to women, you'll see a woman will, this is an example, a woman will put her hand on a man, maybe on a man's shoulder, and not think that she's crossing some boundary. But the moment a man puts his hands on that woman's shoulder, the woman who puts her hands on men, then it becomes a problem. So I think we should also be critical, especially when it comes to the different sexes, so that it doesn't, like, things don't just go one way. If for you don't hug strangers, then even if you know me, but I consider you a stranger, then you should allow me not to hug you. But you will see people getting offended because they think that we are close, but we are not. I think there is a very good example. Okay, it's not such a good example. It's a bad example where we have a comedian called Patrice O'Neill. He said that he was in a relationship with a girl for 5 years, but the girl was in a relationship with him for 8 years. So it is like the time the relationship started, the girl thought they were in a relationship, but the guy was not in a relationship with her. So I think also we should also be cognizant of those kind of dynamics. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond. I think, as you've said, it's important that even men communicate boundaries, especially physical and sexual boundaries. And it's also important that as a society, we also acknowledge that we have women that actually cross over the men's boundaries. So it's important to make it clear that as a man, as a woman, we both have our boundaries, and it's important to communicate them. Musa?
Thank you so much. There's something that Raymond has just mentioned. It's going critical. I would like to throw a spanner in the works here. Can we think of boundaries without thinking of intimacy? Yeah, whereby if the set boundaries are there, yeah, how we can tackle them or how we can reach them without talking about sexual activities. That's just a concern, or rather a question I would like to post. Thank you.
Thank you, Musa. I think we concentrated on the intimacy part because we were talking about sexual, because I believe sexual is all about being intimate with someone else. And even if you cross someone else's sexual boundary, that means you've gotten intimate with them, but unconsensually. So that's why we've concentrated on the intimacy part when it comes to sexual boundaries. So moving on, we have the intellectual boundaries, and this concerns thoughts of someone and beliefs. Intellectual boundaries are not respected when someone dismisses another person's ideas and opinions. And for example, when it comes to now intellectual, we find that, for example, right now, we have people who don't want to get the vaccine. And unfortunately enough, you'll find that people start judging them, yet they have their own reasons as to why they don't want to get the vaccine. It could be medical, it could be just a personal decision, and also it just could be that they really don't want to get the vaccine. So it is important to respect other people's boundaries in terms of how they think and how they reason, instead of just dismissing them without hearing them out. Because again, you will never be right always. Kila mtu ako na venye ana make argument. So how you think about something will not be the same way I think about something. So it is important to acknowledge that we all think differently and we all believe in different things. It's also, for example, even when it comes even to religious beliefs, we have people who don't believe in religion, but they know that, of course, God exists. And we also have atheists, yes, who also don't believe in in existence of God. So we are a country that acknowledges freedom of expression. So it's important to also respect people's intellectual boundaries. So I don't know if someone has anything to add on that in terms of intellectual boundaries.
Yes, at the risk of seeming to be talking too much, I think you have touched on a very important aspect. We currently we don't encourage and celebrate diversity of thought. We like what we call echo chambers, where we all have the same thoughts, we all have the same ideas, we all have the same reasons why, or the same mindset. And anytime you try to challenge or you try to share something different, you become demonized, and then like things are bad. Like for example, if you look at social media currently, there are things you cannot post on Facebook. There are things you cannot post on YouTube. They will be taken down, even though these platforms pretend that they are for free speech. But then they brought in an issue which they call hate speech in order to try and circumvent issues of speech. Like, for example, hate is something which is very subjective. You see, I look at you funny, and then somebody will say, you hate me. I do not maybe greet you today, then utasikia mtu anasema, hey, siku hizi unanichukia. So hate, when you start saying things to do with hate, it is very subjective. And now when you put the subjectivity and regulate people because of somebody's subjectivity, then it does not make sense. And then people do not share their ideas. People do not feel like, or people do not think that they can speak. And then when people are quiet, then you realize you're not getting the right ideas because people do not want to share their thoughts with people who do not respect them. Like you said, the issue of vaccine. There are places where they are having vaccine passports. Like kama hujadungwa hiyo shindano, kama hujapewa ile karatasi ya kudungwa shindano, you can't move. So I think that is something which is very serious. People need to understand that everyone have their own thought process. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Moving on, we also have the mental boundaries, and this refers to your personal thought process. Always seeing eye to eye with another person is not possible. Everyone has different experiences, and you have the right to your own thoughts, your own values, your own beliefs, and your own opinions. It is therefore important to give and receive respect when it comes to mental boundaries. Just mental kind of relates with the intellectual because it's also more of thoughts and beliefs. And therefore, it is also important to know that there exists mental boundaries. Moving on, we have emotional. I think Eric had mentioned it in the chat box, and emotional now refers to a person's own feelings. You might not feel comfortable sharing your feelings about everything with a friend or a partner. Instead, you prefer to share gradually and over time. Of course, we have those people who share their problems, their feelings, pole too. These boundaries may be pushed or crossed when we take and accept responsibility for another's feelings and actions, letting others' feelings dictate our own and sacrificing our own needs to please another. Sometimes you find people, in terms of emotional boundaries, you might feel something about something else, but since you have this clique of friends that you need to please, you now start relating to their way of feeling, which is not the way you as a person feels. So it is important to respect emotional boundaries of people. And as I read in the chat box, Eric contributed to sexual, said, I don't know if this counts as sexual. A woman deliberately going off the pill without prior discussion with the man is violation of the man's sexual and reproductive boundaries. And yes, I do agree. And the same applies to the decision to keep or terminate a pregnancy. Yes, most times you'll find women saying it's their body, so they don't involve the man. But I think it's important because you two are partners and you consented to probably have sex. So therefore, it is important to involve both partners when it comes to decision-making in terms of pregnancy or even just sexual reproductive rights. In addition to intellectual boundaries, is signing off all speech that makes you uncomfortable as hate speech, a popular consequence of this in cancel culture. Yes, and I think Raymond mentioned the same too, where you find there's this culture yenye tumebuildiwa that we have to relate in a certain manner or think in a certain manner yenye iko common to everyone so that it seems right. But at the end of the day, you realize kuna wengine tumevuka boundaries zao. So on financial, of course, finances means money. If you like to save money, not spend it on trendy fashions, you might not want to loan money to a friend who does. Especially when it comes now to finances, sometimes maybe I have a good job, then you have this friend of mine, I'm at a parent. They believe that because you have that job, you must spend on them, or akikuitisha pesa, hufai kumnyima. But when I realize, of course, when I do my earnings, I have my own boundaries. Labda nimejiambia hii month, sitapitisha ikiwango ya pesa. But you'll find that people won't understand you because they assume if you have money, you should spend it. And especially in family setups, kama mzazi wako anajua maybe pesa una earn, kuna wale wenye wanakaanga sasa comfortably wana believe that your money is their money. Like wameshaanza kukupatia nitwaje roles za kufanya without even consulting you, wameshaanza kupangia pesa yako. But you realize it's important to have that financial boundary. And maybe as I read kwa chat before someone aweke addition, Joyner says, hapo kwa feeling from my understanding, also asking someone to justify their feeling is violation of emotional boundaries. So nikiuliza mtu, like for instance, a partner, why do you love me? Na cross boundary. I think hii tutajibu as participants here is asking someone, why do you love me, crossing their boundaries? And also contributions are open to financial boundaries as well, if there are any. So tuko na financial boundary na tuko na hiyo nini ya join na swali. Kuuliza msee, how do you feel about me? Is that crossing their boundaries? Sorry. Any feedback from the participants?
I don't think so.
Explain further.
I think it's just a question. Then kama una cross boundary, mtu anataka tu kujua reason, why do you love me? Sioni vile ina violate nini yako, boundary yako.
Okay, thank you so much for that contribution. Yes, Musa?
Nafikiria inaweza kuwa ina cross boundaries if and only if maybe kulikuwa na the set boundary that question should not come that direction. Yeah, but kama haikuwa set before, then hapo hakuna boundary inakuwa crossed. Thanks.
Thank you, Musa. Yes, Raymond?
Just using that example, why do you love me? Hiyo sasa wacha tu nisiende sana, niseme tu if you have to ask that question, the best thing to do is just get out of the relationship. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. I think kila mtu anai process kivyake. So Joyner, I think from those answers, una perspective umeget on whether it is violating someone's right or not. But I think it depends with someone as well. So the next boundary is time and energy boundaries. Of course, setting boundaries for your time and energy are also a necessity. Time and energy boundary violations can look like being kept in a conversation longer than you had planned, or being requested from your boss to do more work without pay, or someone showing up significantly later than agreed upon without clearly communicating. And yes, sometimes you might agree mna meet na msee saa fulani, but because they assume you are free, au wanakuja time yenye wanataka, si ile time mulikuwa mumeagree. And I know so many of us kinda relate to this. Most times tumevuka boundaries za watu when it comes to time, and also people have crossed our boundaries when it comes to time. And kama najua mtu kama Kamau ana respecting time yake sana, ukikuja late inakuanga ni kama umevuka boundary yake vibaya sana. He respects time. That is one thing I know about Raymond. Additions, ama hiyo tufunge hivyo. So I assume silence means kila mtu amekubaliana na time. So last one is material boundaries, which refers to personal possessions and the limits on how your items are treated or when they can or cannot be used. If your things are being touched or used without your permission, being stolen or destroyed, then your material boundaries are in clear violation. It is your decision who you comfortably share with something, or if you don't want to share something at all. And boundary ya material sana sana in a family setup, you find that because I assume we are siblings, you can freely take my clothes na uvae without feeling any form of shame. Let me just say evil. I know it's a bad term. Ama you can freely take anything yenye tu iko kwa nyumba as long as unajua ati hii ni ya mtu wetu, without even asking about it. And most times utapata labda utachukua hiyo kitu uende uharibu, and when you spoil it now inakuwa issue. So it's important, even if you want something from mtu mmezoeana, it's important to ask about it. Don't just take it because una assume this is my friend, this is my sibling. You never know if they had planned to put on that cloth, or walikuwa wameplan kuchukua whatever maybe kitu yao yenye umechukua. Inaweza kuwa ulipata laptop yake hapo na labda alikuwa anataka kuitumia. Sasa wewe juu na assume iko hapo idling, umeshachukua umeanza kufanyia kazi yako, na labda yeye alikuwa anataka kuitumia maybe 10 minutes later, but because you did not ask about it, kunakuwa na mvurutano. So it's important to also like respect material things za watu. Additions, subtractions, before we move on.
Mimi niko na swali.
Uliza.
And hii sana sana ni something which I have seen happen. For example, umekuja umeniomba kitu yangu, right? And venye umeniomba, or umeniambia umekuwa, so I give you my possession for you to, I buy it for you because I know uko na shida. And then hatukai sana, napata hiyo stuff nilikununulia ama nilikusaidia nayo na mtu mwingine, and it's not like uli replace, like ulipata something else to use. Sijui kama unaniget, like uko for example uko na shida ya laptop, unakam unateseka, so I say okay, you situmii laptop, nimekupea, like si ati nimekusaidia, nimekupea. Then a week later napata hiyo laptop na somebody very different, and you still don't have a laptop and you're suffering. What can you say about that? Or what can people say about that?
Maybe nikuelewe vizuri, nimekupatia laptop utumie, but a week later hiyo laptop yenye nilikuwa nimekusaidia na umepatia mtu mwingine. Right?
Yes. and you still need a laptop. It's not like you bought another laptop, so now you don't need a laptop. But sasa, it's like, and this one, hii ni kitu yenye imekuwa ikifanyika na older parents. I've been hearing people complaining where a parent calls you and tells you, sina chakula kwa nyumba. So you send them food. And then instead of them using the food, they give it out. And then they still come back to you and tell you, sina chakula.
Personally, for me, of course, that is, you ameruka boundary yako, because an assume every time they don't have the food, or kama hata kuwa ni hiyo kitu, hautamkasirikia juu wewe ni mtoto wake ama juu wewe ni rafiki yake. So to some extent, it's like they are taking advantage. I think even ndo mimi naweza ichukua. Sijui watu wengine wanaichukuliaje. Reactions from participants on Raymond's question. As I read on the chat box, Eric says, kama huyu ni mtu alispoil laptop ya wenyewe alafu sasa hiyo umempatia ni payment. Yes, it could be that. It could be that mtu alikuwa na deni ya mtu mwingine. Hata parents sometimes when they ask for money, it could be hiyo pesa amekuomba, labda alikuwa na deni ya mtu mwingine. So hiyo pesa yenye umempatia ndiye ametumia kulipa deni. The same way Eric says hiyo laptop inaweza kuwa alikuwa ameharibu ya mtu mwingine. So when he or she got hold of that laptop, ikabidi amesaidiana. And maybe before Musa Wonge, I can read what Eric's contribution in terms of the feeling, the emotional boundaries. Asking the question is not a boundary, crossing a boundary. It's the same as someone asking, why are you so good to me? People who ask this question typically have low self-esteem, so we should not take it personally. An additional to material boundaries is taking responsibility and fixing or replacing damaged products. Yeah, sometimes unaweza enda kwa nyumba ya mtu upate kuna kitu imeharibika, wewe una assume anataka kuitengeneza, so you end up kuitengeneza and labda he or she wanted to dispose it off ama kupeana, lakini wewe umejituma kuirepair bila ruhusa yake. Yes, Musa?
Yangu ni question say in a family setup whereby the man buys the utensils, seme kisu, kijiko, ziko jikoni, yeah, then this man does not go to that kitchen to pick these items, not unless he asks for the items from the wife. Yeah, can you also consider that a boundary? Yeah, because huko ni department ya mwanadada. So for this man kuamka kwenda paka jikoni kuchukua kitu bila kuuliza, it's an issue, or rather it would be an issue. Yeah, it's just a concern on that direction. Thank you.
I think ukianza umesema bwana ndiye alinunua hizo vyombo, if I'm not wrong. So if ni amezinunua, I don't see any need of them asking kutumia vyombo, unless ni agreement walikuwa wameagree na bibi yake that kitchen is my department and if you want to use anything, ask permission from me. But otherwise I assume kwa nyumba, unless mumeongea juu ya hizo boundaries, maybe kitchen ni part yangu, hii part ni part yangu, then mtu tu yote anafaa kutumia. That's my reasoning. Unless it was communicated prior that going to the kitchen and using items without my permission ni makosa.
Mimi niko na concern, but sasa hii I think sana hii ina deal na sisi wale watu wenye maybe tuko married, na sana inakuja kwa nani anakuaga mwenye nyumba, because hii kitu inasumbuaga sana watu juu ukijaribu kuingia na viatu kwa nyumba unanichafulia nyumba yangu, lakini time ya rent ikifika wewe ndio unakuaga mwenye nyumba wakati rent inakujiwa, so unasikia naambia landlord mwenye nyumba hayuko. So I think hii tutaongelea kwa forum yenye maybe tuko na watu wako married to solve, but I think hiyo pia ni kitu ya boundaries.
Yes, and as I've just said previously, unless mumesema hii ni bwana anafanya hii, ni bibi anafanya hii, lazima bwana akonsultiwe. So zinafaa kukuwa clearly communicated. Otherwise, nyumba kama mnaishi watu wawili, hiyo nyumba ni yenu nyinyi wote. Anyway, tutaongelea hiyo nini baadaye. So
Ndio, Jolly,
yes.
hata kama tunasema tuongelea baadaye, but kitu Raymond amesema ni ukweli. Yeah, because unajua mkiingia kwa the covenant ya ndoa, yeah, kuna hizo set rules ambazo zinakujanga automatically hata bila kuambiwa. Yeah, hizo ndio boundaries tunaongelea. Yeah, na ni za material whereby hii nyumba ni moja, yes, but when it comes to now the duties ama responsibilities ambazo zinafaa kuwa partaken kwa hii nyumba zinakuwa set kwa the different genders. Yeah, so nafikiria ni boundary tu kivyake na inafaa tu idiskasiwe hapa, because wakati pesa inatoka kwa mfuko ama wakati unaingia na kiatu kipigiwa kelele, hapo unajua kweli boundary iko. Thanks.
Yes, thanks Musa. Na bado tu nita insist. I think as a married couple ni important kuongelea, communicate about these things. Set these boundaries. Ziseme ndio mtu akivuka mpaka ikue you said it na sasa amevuka mpaka. Juu unajuanga kuna mahomes zinakuanga na house rules. Unasikianga mtu asiingie na viatu kwa nyumba, mtu asitumie sijui hii vyombo kabla hajauliza ruhusa. So unless that is there, definitely kutakuwa na hiyo inaitwaje restriction, but kama hakuna any boundaries itavukwa tu because no one talked about it. But it is important like to clearly state how you want to run things in your home, who should do what, etc. So as we finish up on the types of boundaries, it's also important to keep in mind that setting and honoring your boundaries and others isn't textbook science. Boundaries can vary from person to person, and having open and honest conversation about them is crucial. And I agree on this because sometimes hizo boundaries zetu, we can set them, but kuna circumstances zinatufanya unalegeshea hiyo boundary yako, depending on the circumstance. For example, if a lady umejipata in danger and you're tuseme most likely ini kitu kama umejipata maybe na wanaume wawili watatu hivi and they want to rape you, and of course kuna hiyo boundary yenye umejisetia as a person, but because uko in danger you might actually opt to ask the perpetrators to use protection instead before like badala ya kujiforce on you unprotected. So sometimes kuna kuanga na hizo circumstances zitatufanya tulegeze boundaries zetu kidogo, because hapa you are thinking about your life, and of course tena unaangalia infections. So if you can negotiate ndo ukuwe safe, and if you can negotiate ndo usipate infection, ama if you can negotiate ndo pia usipate mimba, then if that means kulegeza boundaries zako kidogo, inaweza kuwa pia mzuri hapo. So I think tuko sawa na hapo types of boundaries. Any aside from yenye kina Raymond walikuwa wamesema kama ile ya mipaka ya countries, of course that's also another boundary yenye imesetiwa. Sijui kama kuna any additions on other types of boundaries that you know of zenye sijataja.
Sijui kama ita qualify kwa physical, but nilikuwa na watch video YouTube ya dema anaitwa Nyamera kwa anaongelea about boundaries. So alikuwa anasema kuna watu ukikaa nao they are very vulgar, like wana curse, wanatusi watu, wanaweza pick fights too easily na anyone. So alikuwa anasema yeye personally hapendi kuko surrounded na watu kama hawa. Hapendi anakaa na mtu na unatusi tu watu, una pick fights, vitu ndogo ndogo, vitu kama hizo. Sasa tunaweza qualify vitu kama hizo kwa physical boundaries ama
I think depending on the statement ama the act inaweza fall under physical, inaweza fall under intellectual, inaweza fall under sexual. It just depends with whatever the person says or how the person acts around them. Because akiongea vitu kama vulgar language, hiyo sana sana itaenda kwa sexual. Alafu ikikam kwa picking fights, etc., hiyo itaenda kwa physical. So it just depends with the actions around that person and whatever maneno yake pia. Hiyo ndio mimi naweza sema. Sijui kama kuna mtu mwingine ako na jibu different ama ya kuongezea to that.
Labda tu venye umesema tu hivyo ndio iko. Depending on the stages za hiyo action ama reaction. Yeah. Kama ime grow into a fight, then that is definitely physical. Yeah. So hapo kuna issue ya physical, emotional na intellectual. Yeah, zote ziko combined in that one act.
So moving on, nini inaweza tuonyesha that ni time kuset boundaries zetu? Ni nini hizi zina trigger, like inaweza kutrigger as a person to say that I now need to set boundaries on such and such a thing, or I now need to set my boundaries between me and someone else. Ni signs gani hizo zinafanyanga tuone ni kama tunafaa kuset boundaries? Na Eric amesema disrespect. Yes. Yes, Musa?
Mimi naweza taja, kwa hiyo swali muuliza naweza taja maybe vitu mbili. One, maybe the aspect of the social well-being. Na ya pili ni age. Yeah, age. In what sense? Venye mtu ana grow, yeah, ana meet watu tofauti na hapo ana set boundaries tofauti. Yeah. Na venye ana interact na hao watu, that's now the social the bit. Pia inampatia the boundaries on which anaweza fika ama anaweza overstep. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much, Musa. Anyone else? So of course, according to kuna clinical psychologist mwingine anaitwa Manley, she says that some of the common signs that means you need to set your boundaries when, number one, feeling chronologically taken advantage of in certain situations such as emotional, financially, or physical. Chronologically na mean yani events tu zikifuatana fuatana. Inaweza kuwa leo nilikusaidia do, kesho tena yani uniambie unataka do, kesho kutwa tena, because now you assume I have that money. Ama kwa akili yako, because I am working, I always have money. So when unaona episodes kama hizo zina come up, especially from a friend ama a family member, it's time to set boundaries. Like mwambie hata kama na earn such and such an amount, I have this specific amount that I have to keep for myself, because at the end of the day, that money is yours. Hiyo pesa si yake. So they cannot define how you should use your money or how you should, when it comes now to maybe physical, maybe mtu leo amekuja akakuhaga ama akakushika in a certain manner, na umemkataza, and then it happens again. That means you need to communicate your boundaries to that person. So another one is saying yes to please others at your own expense. Of course, nowadays juu ya peer pressure pia siku hizi kwa watu wakubwa. Because mimi naamini maybe because friend yangu amevaccinatiwa, let me now use the COVID experience. So naamini I should also get vaccinated just because my friend get vaccinated. na hiyo sijaenda kuangalia hata like side effects ni gani, ama do I really want this vaccine, etc. So you're saying yes to please others at your own risk means unafaa kuset boundaries. You don't get your needs met because you tend to fear conflict and give in to others. The same way Raymond alisema, nowadays unapata tuko na hii culture, yeah, we have to argue in a certain manner, ama we have to relate in certain things just because everyone else relates to them. I can be different. Naweza kosa kurelate nao kulingana na venye mimi nimereziwa ama venye maisha pia imenifunza. So that also means that you need to set boundaries. Often feeling disrespected by others but not standing up for yourself. Yes, venye Eric amesema, ukianza kuona disrespect inakuja, that means you need to set boundaries. Your fear of being rejected or abandoned leaves you accepting less than you deserve. For example, kwa relationship, inaweza kwa sasa umeapproach maybe ages za 30 hivi. So anyone that now comes to you akikukatia, unaingia tu box yake just for the sake of juu naona ni kama other people will reject you. And sometimes huo mtu hata relate na venye wewe unataka kurelate, ama you don't even share some things. You are just there because unaona age is catching up with you, people are talking, etc. Another one is engaging in people-pleasing behaviors in order to be liked and to receive approval. Most times, we always want approval from others. And sometimes seeking others' approval inafanya hata like you ufiki penye unafaa kufika just for this because ulitaka tu kusika approval from someone else. Labda kuna hii job unataka kuapply, uende ulize best yako, unaweza apply hii job. Best yako anza kukuuliza, uko na masters, uko sijui na nini. Wewe unaweza hama, unaweza na hiyo job. So hiyo kusika approval, of course ita reduce self-esteem yako, and at the end of the day you might not end up applying for that job. But at times unge-apply labda for your job na ungeipata. But because you chose to seek approval from other people, sasa hukuweza hata kuapply hiyo job na hiyo job ikakupita hivyo. So when you have such people around you, ama when you realize you're always after seeking approval from other people, that means you have to set boundaries. Kujisetia wewe mwenyewe. Then engaging in disrespectful behavior that hurts others. Flirting with those who are in relationships, or flirt when you are in a relationship even when it harms others. Of course, kuna wale watu wanajua huu ni demu yako, lakini bado anaenda kuflirt na yeye ama anamkatia, na ni mtu unajua. So that means as a person, ama hata pia huyo demu mwenyewe anafaa set boundaries, na huyu chali pia it's time una set boundaries. Unaambia umse huu ni manzi yangu na usivuke hapa hii mpaka. But of course easy decisions sometimes depend on the two of them, because at the end of the day hawa ni grown ups. You won't decide for them what they want to do. Hao wenyewe ndio wanajua how they will react to a certain manner. Then doing whatever you want to get your needs met, believing that limits don't apply to you. So when you get to these stages, according to huyo daktari anaitwa Manly, huyo psychologist, ukiona like these episodes in your life, ama this kind of activities going on in your life, it is time you set boundaries for yourself. Sijui kama kuna mtu ako na addition on that, ama ku emphasis as well.
I have a comment. Let me call it a comment. There are people, I think, who are very good in boundary setting, but then boundaries zao zina affect other people the way they relate. Ushaona mse mwenye anataka kuimpose boundaries zake kwa watu wengine. Like for example, mimi sipendi jokes. So if I find two people joking, I just want to stop them from joking. And maybe hao watu wawili ni marafiki and they like joking with one another. So that every time I am around, people don't want to be around me. And then I play the victim, and then I start saying, oh, people don't like me. It's because, I know how to set my boundaries. It's because they want to take advantage of me. So anaingia kwa victim Olympics. But ni vile tu yeye anakuwa very strict na boundaries zake. So people do not want to relate with this person ile design ya ubeshte, kwa sababu wewe uko very strict, hautaki kuhag watu, hautaki watu wakijoka karibu na wewe, hutaki watu wakicheka. So when you come into a room, people get out of the room. Not because hawakupendi, but it's because they want to respect your boundaries. But sasa wewe unawafuata huko nje, so unaanza kuona watu excuse me, watu wanaanza kuku-avoid. So ni vizuri kukuwa na boundaries, but then also lazima pia tuangalie tuko kwa setting gani, so that you don't bring your boundaries kwa setting fulani. For example, if uko kwa setting yenye iko na very many, like una deal na young people, huwezi leta boundaries zako za kizee pale. Of course lazima ukwe na some sort of boundaries, but lazima hiyo boundary we customize kulingana na ile setting uko, because where there are young people, there will be joking, people will just want to have fun, people will want to dress a certain kind of way. Sasa wewe uko offended, inakuja inakuwa sasa problematic, especially when you are working with these people. So I think it is important also, as we are setting our own boundaries, tukuwe na common sense. Let me use that word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raymond, for that addition and putting that emphasis. Alafu nimependa ile fact yenye sometimes unapata mtu ya amejisetia boundary lakini anataka kuimplicate hiyo boundary kwa kila mtu. That's not right, because mtu pia ako na boundary zake na pia anaziset in a certain manner. So as much as me, I respect your boundaries, but I don't necessarily have to relate with your boundaries, and you cannot impose them on me. Basil, I had seen your hand up.
Nilikuwa nataka ku add on kwa what Raymond has said. Like when you're setting boundaries, I think you should know that like it's people you're dealing with, like not robots. Like people make mistakes, a lot of people, like hadi like always expect ati boundaries zako zitakuwa respected like 24/7, ati venye unataka kila kitu happen as in hivyo ati ndio ita happen. You like watu wana making mistakes na like issue ni as long as mi naona like as long as mtu akiona ameviolate maybe boundaries zako, maybe akuwe tu willing ku apologize maybe, then life goes on. You ukiexpect nini as in boundaries zako zikuwe fulfilled all the time, uta end up being alone. Juu watu watakuwa like humse like ni fujo tu, like ni chaos, like itakuwa chaotic. Hivyo ndio, that's what I wanted to say. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Basil. And a comment from Eric. There's really no sign, according to me. The most important boundaries should be set from the start, even when things are fine. In future, boundaries should be set and enforced when someone does something you do not like. And yes, upon the tuna move next, like now, how do we set these boundaries? Ama, what does it mean to set a boundary? Like, inamaanisha nini exactly? So of course, what does it mean now to set a boundary? Of course, it means verbalizing what impacts your comfort levels. Like just telling the people around you, this and this makes me feel comfortable. So if they cannot make you feel that comfortable, of course, unajua sasa hawa, huwezi waimposia nini zako, boundaries zako. Ultimately, boundaries speak to what we identify as making us comfortable or uncomfortable. So it is important to verbalize what impacts your comfort levels. Kama umeitwa mahali, tuseme, kama hizi conferences watu wanaendanga. Nowadays at least naonanga kuna kuangana hiyo option ya unaweza penda room inakaaje, food type gani, etc. So ukiongea juu ya hizo nini zako, boundaries zako, utapata it's easier for people to respect them, and it's easier for people to understand them. Another one is it means learning how and when to say no. Many times we feel that we owe others a dissertation level response to why we cannot do this task or go to a certain event. The fact of the matter is that a good boundary is an explanation in and of itself. For example, I'm quite sorry, I cannot commit to working on that project over the weekend. I appreciate you thinking of me and having confidence in me, but not this time. And that one is like a perfectly adequate response. For example, hata mtu akikwambia, oh, kuna hii job yenye iko hapa na hapa na, you have a choice to tell them that, asanti kwa kunifikiria, but kulingana na my likings or my way of life, mimi staki hii job. And I don't think ukiambia msee hivyo, like in a good way, as much as tuko na hizi boundaries, the way we communicate them is also important. Like venye tunasema hiyo no, kama u venye amesema hiyo no, I'm quite sorry but I cannot commit to working on that project over the weekend. Ameisema vizuri, hata uwezi feel vibaya juu amekuambia no, because ameanza kwanza na apology alafu akakwambia hawezi kuifanya juu labda alikuwa shapanga vitu zingine over the weekend. It also means being transparent and honest. Of course, making a conscious decision to set certain boundaries is not enough. You must also communicate those boundaries to the people they involve. Setting boundaries also includes letting others know what they are, not expecting others to have a crystal ball and just know what you want or do not want. And that is very true. Like as much as tuna set hizi boundaries, mimi si Yesu nijue umeseti boundary, unataka kutritiwa hivi, ama ufai kushikwa hivi. You must say them out. You must be transparent about those boundaries. The same way venye tunaambiwanga ile story, no means no. You must be transparent in saying that no. Ndio mtu ajue hiyo no ni no ya ukweli. It also means knowing how to expand or constrict the boundaries we set. It's also worth noting that a person with healthy boundaries is able to adjust their boundaries depending on the situation to allow for the appropriate level of connection. The way to Raymond amesema, when you go to a youth gathering, definitely kuna jokes hapo. So you have to let go your boundary yako ya seriousness and try be flexible with them in order to like associate with them. In practice, we consciously and unconsciously use boundaries to let others know what is acceptable or appropriate. When our boundaries are too permeable, we might tend to let people take advantage of us or accept abusive treatment. When our boundaries are too rigid, we might behave in highly defended ways to keep respectful, loving people at a distance. And yes, like tumesema tu hapo before, like it's important as much as tuko na hizi boundaries, tukue in a way that we are flexible and expanding. Know when to really like impose these boundaries. Alafu pia boundaries pia zina depend situation huko, place huko, mnafanya nini. So it's really, really important to know how to expand or constrict the boundaries that you set. And hapa inatuonyesha now how venye tunaweza set personal boundaries zetu. Define, identify your desired boundaries, communicate, say what you need. Stay simple, don't over-explain. Set the consequences, say why it's important to you that you have those boundaries. Comments and addition?
I think hii part ya consequences ndio watu wengi huwa hawafanyi. Okay, what happens if mtu amevuka boundary yako? What happens? And then also, isikuwe like ni empty threats. Because once people understand that they can cross your boundaries, they can violate your boundaries with no consequences, then what will make them respect those boundaries? As long as the boundary has been defined, communicated, and you understand it, and then you breach it, then I think lazima kukuwe na some follow-up consequence, so that even if like mtoto, for example, parents do not like punishing their kids. Unaona kuchapa mtoto, like as a parent I also feel pain when I'm like caning my child, but because kuna kitu amefanya, amevuka mpaka mahali fulani na lazima nimuonyeshe consequences, so that just has to happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. And also, Eric says something else is to stay consistent with certain boundaries. Otherwise, people will continuously violate them. Yes. Na hapo mbele tutaona like now tips za maintain hizi boundaries zetu. So thank you so much, Eric. Anyone else? So moving on now, we will look at now the tips of setting and maintaining our boundaries. Number one, understanding your needs, limits, and values. First step in setting boundaries is to know where your limits are. What do you need emotionally, mentally, physically? Are these needs being met? Are some situations putting your body and mind under unnecessary stress? Do some people treat you in ways you wouldn't treat them? So be honest with yourself and have some clear lines in place with yourself. So even if you can't set them first time round, you know where you want to establish your boundaries. So of course, once you understand your needs, your limits, and your values, it will make it easier for you to set and maintain your boundaries. Of course, you have to ask yourself easy questions ziko hapo. What do you need emotionally? What do you need physically? What do you need mentally? And are your needs being met? So that is tip number one. Number two, set them early. Sometimes it can be really hard to start putting boundaries in, especially in pre-existing relationships. If you can put in boundaries straight away, it's a lot easier to work with. And as we always say, when you start a relationship from the onset, sema hii relationship yako unataka ikuwe aje? Should it be intimate? Should it be, do you guys want to be celibate, still married? As in, communicate these things early enough. Ndio mtu ajue kama ana proceed na hii relationship or not. By setting boundaries, expectations from the very beginning, everyone knows where they stand, and feelings of hurt, confusion, and frustration can be lessened. And that is very true. Once you communicate all these things from the onset, definitely mtu atachoose kama anaendelea na wewe. So kama ataendelea na wewe, ina mean atakuwa less hurt, ama less frustrated, ama less confused. Moving on, focus on yourself and your rights. Always focus on yourself. We can't change others, their action, nor is it our responsibility. Boundaries help change the situation for you. We can focus on what is within our control, such as boundaries, actions, behaviors, and thoughts. We all have rights, and it's learning which ones are more important to you as a person that will also help set your boundaries. For example, I have a right to say no without feeling guilty. Of course, you have a right to say no without feeling guilty. I have the right to be treated with respect by both myself and others. I have the right to make my needs as important as people's. I have the right to accept my mistake without being hard on myself. I have a right not to meet unreasonable expectations other people may have of me. And yes, when you focus on yourself and what you as a person wants, definitely you will be able to set those boundaries for yourself and be able to maintain them. Speak up respectfully. Kama venye nilikuwa nimesema from the other example I gave, like, I am sorry, I cannot commit to this project over the weekend. As in, how you speak it out, definitely it is in a respectful manner, and someone will definitely respect that boundary. So once you start to figure out which parts of your life could benefit from boundary, start taking steps towards implementing them. This could be involving Things like asking someone for clarity respectfully, correcting someone, or expressing discomfort with someone's behavior. Of course, in case mtu tu from nowhere amekuja akakushika in a certain manner yenye utaki, unamwambia I'm sorry, please don't touch me like that next time. Si ile tu unaanza kumshotia usinishike hivyo, na yeye ameassume labda places zenye anaendanga maybe akifika there's a way they hug ama there's a way they just place someone's hand. Venye Raymond amesema kuna wale watu wanatembeanga tu anajipata place hand on yourself. So if someone places that hand on you na utaki, just tell them kindly next time don't put mkono yako kwa nini yangu because I don't feel comfortable. Definitely umemwongelesha vizuri, but ukimshautia inaweza turn now into exchange of words. Hapo ndo unapata watu wanaanza kutukanana etc. And then verbalize your concern and intention. Personal boundaries teach others how we want to be treated. When we are able to communicate our needs in a way that is clear and direct, we can feel confident that we are treating the other person fairly, even if they do not agree with our decisions. It is important that our intentions are consistent with our values and are reflective of our personal needs as well. So verbalize, ongea. Speak about how you want to be treated. Speak about how you want to be communicated to. Talk about it. Talk. Then practice self-care. Boundaries are a form of a self-care. When you set your boundaries, you're taking care of yourself. At the end of the day, venye tu tumesema huko kwanza, it's all about you. So you having those boundaries means you're taking care of yourself. Practicing healthy self-care habits allow you to recharge your batteries for yourself and those around you. So once, of course, you set those boundaries, that means you're taking care of yourself. It is part of self-care. Then be consistent, just as Eric said kwa chat box. Letting boundaries slide can lead to confusion and encourage new expectations. Okay, sorry about that. So it is important to be consistent. Letting boundaries slide can lead to confusion and encourage new expectations and demands among those around you. Kindly, Euphemia, mute your mic. So when you set a boundary, for example, uliingia kwa hii relationship, ukasema, kwa hii relationship, we won't have sex. Be consistent with that. Kama hivyo ndo umeamua. Si ati sasa ifike point, it's like you want that sex, then you end up, maybe your boyfriend rapes you. Of course, hiyo ni vibaya, but kwa makeses mob tunaonanga sana ilikuwa it's like it was consent, then at the end of the day kakuje kakua ni non-consensual. So just be consistent. Sema sitaki hii na ukwe consistent nayo mpaka mwisho until now you guys decide to let go of the consistency. Try keeping things consistent and steady. This helps to reinforce your original threshold and beliefs, and it ensures those lines remain clearly established. Kama uhagingi watu, be consistent with it. Isikuwe leo umesema uhag watu, kesho mwingine anaona umehag mwingine, so ye next time anakuja na kuhag, unakasirika. So just be consistent with the boundaries that you've set. Hata kwa household, kama umesema watu wasiingie kwa nyumba na carpet. Sasa juu labda wewe ndio mwenye ulisema, hata wewe mwenye ufai kuingia kwa nyumba na kuna viatu ukanyage carpet because ulisema watu wasiingie kwa nyumba na viatu kukanyaga carpet. So be consistent with that. And then another one is realize that it takes practice and patience. Of course, venye tu tulisema uko mwanzo, setting easy boundaries is a walk in the park, and even maintaining them is not a walk in the park. For some people, even thinking about setting boundaries can trigger anxiety. As you practice setting boundaries, you may certainly feel anxious and unsettled until it becomes natural. Of course, kuna zile boundaries utajisetia, but at the back of your mind, uko like, is this boundary ni kitu nita maintain kweli? So Manly explains that even if it's tough at first, practice stating your truth with dignity, courage, and disrespect. Na hii imenifanya nikumbuke kuna video ingine kina Crazy Kena walishare juzi. The way we grew up, these are my private part, these are my private part. But unaenda club, unapata wewe ndio uko hapo una dance bend over. So it's no longer a private part in that setting. So of course it will take some time for you to adjust to that. So practice and patience, because uta realize now that because it is your private part, the next time maybe you go out to the club dancing, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to bend over and dance to unaweza jibamba tu wewe mwenyewe and dance peke yako bila mtu kukushika, unless you've allowed that person to touch you. Another one is understand that different relationships require different boundaries. And here we are given an example that you may have very flexible boundaries with an intimate partner. And intimacy thrives when both partners understand and honor each other's boundaries needs. And this respectful attitude contributes to ongoing boundary flexibility. But now you'll find that in a work setup, it is appropriate for inappropriate for employees and staff members to have more rigid boundaries. Certain behaviors such as sharing of personal information, sexual contact, flirting between management and staff are generally inappropriate and often illegal. So kuna ile, depending on the setup, unaweza jipata ukiwa na maybe friends wako ama your intimate partner, there's a way you talk, there's a way you behave, but now when you go to the office setup, kuna vitu ni inappropriate. Huwezi ongea vitu zenye unaongeanga na intimate partner wako. You cannot go about sharing personal information just with everyone in the office the way you share with your intimate partner or your very close friend. And also you cannot relate with them sexually as you relate with your partner outside there. And that's why many office setups unapatanga relationships between employees zimekataliwa. As much as some do work out, but in most cases zinakwanga discouraged because utapata watu watakuja waanze kushare information zao hapo kwa ofisi na hamfai kuzisikia just because walikosania kitu. So wanakuja wanaanza kuanikana kwa ofisi. So it's important to understand the different relationship require different boundaries. So that is the end in terms of how to like set and maintain like healthy boundaries in whether in a relationship, whether in a family, whether it's your personal like personal boundary, whether it's in terms of your material boundary. So those are some of the tips. So sijui kama kuna any comments or any additions, subtractions, maswali. So maybe from the chat box, there's some of the comments. Also, someone taking your properties juu mmezoeana without permission. Of course, hiyo ni kuvuka boundary ya mtu. Then we've talked about enforcing boundaries and saying no. In the same light, we should also take else gracefully and not violate other people's boundaries. And yes, I do agree with what Eric says. It's also good to take a no gracefully and not violate another person's boundaries because they already communicated their boundaries. So kukwambia no to something means you should respect it. Any additions, comments before we finalize? Frank says, na pia kuna watu who violate people's boundaries na wanajijustify tu. Yeah, it's unfortunate. that people violate your boundary, you talked about your boundary, you communicated it well, but still kuna mse anavuka hiyo mpaka yako na anajijustify with you doing all those things, with you talking about it, with you communicating it respectfully. We still have those people that will still violate your boundaries. And that now is where the consequences come in. Like now someone has amevuka mpaka yako, it's important to have consequences in place, whether you will choose to shtaki them, depending on the acts. It is very important to also communicate the consequences and act on the consequences as well, so that equal lesson, so that next time mtu asitake advantage of it. Comments? I assume silence means no comment. So as we finalize, tukiangalia hii picha tunaangalia, once you set, of course, like have healthy boundaries, ama umeset hizo boundaries no umezi-maintain, they will definitely lead to good mental health. Once communicate hizo boundaries zako, and we assume that people respect them, ama people wamezi accept, hautakuwa na a lot of stress. Hata yani utakuwa tu mentally you will be okay, you won't be anxious, because of course kuna kwanga niyo experience anxiety when you set those boundaries, but once ushazi set na umeshazizoea, your anxiety itapungua, and that will means itakuwa, you will have some good mental health. And of course it will influence others' behavior. Sometimes the boundaries we set for those around us, it is likely to influence positive behaviors, especially for those around us, because mtu ataona huwa aliset boundary yake na imerespectiwa vizuri, and life yake somehow iko poa. So hata mimi neza learn from that person and be able to set boundaries for myself, and that will mean that nime influence behavior ya those around me. Of course, auto setting boundaries will lead to good emotional health, and venye tumesema, from the onset, when you communicate, especially when it comes to a relationship, you may communicate your feelings, how you want to be treated, how that relationship you want it to move. Uki communicate from the onset, mse mwenye ume communicate to yeye ata choose at that start of the relationship, whether they want to proceed with this relationship or not, and depending on their feelings pia, because anaweza choose kuproceed na ikuwe sawa, but kulingana na pia like the boundaries uliset, anaona hapa siwezi endelea, ina lesson ile nini ya him or her to get hurt in the process, because it was done early enough na aka choose yeye anataka kuendelea na hii relationship ama yeye hataki kuendelea na hii relationship. Then of course italeta avoidance of burnout. For example, in a work setup, if you have communicated your boundaries respectfully to your boss, like you cannot be able to do this and work because maybe haiko kwa contract yangu, ama I had other plans. Of course, you communicate prior. Definitely kutakuwa na avoidance of burnout. Hakuna mtu atakuforce kuifanya, because you communicated it early enough that mimi on certain day I don't work. So even if your boss or rather just someone else wants you to work that day ama during that weekend, kuna venye atakucommunicatea vizuri na mnaweza kunegotiate. So of course with that you avoid burnout. Then pia setting or rather having healthy boundaries inasaidia pia kuwa na developed autonomy. Kukuwa na developed autonomy means that you are now able to think for yourself, like venye wewe unataka, to make decisions for yourself. Because when we were sharing some of the tips, it's all about yourself. So when it's all about yourself, then definitely you're able to make decisions about yourself. You're able to share your thoughts depending on how you feel and how you think, and also developed identity. Sasa of course someone will identify you kulingana na venye umeset boundaries zako. If mimi staki mtu ashike vitu zangu, of course that someone else will know, vitu za huyu hazishikwangi, and they'll be able to realize that huyu hapendi vitu zake zikishikwa. The way Eric says, I know Eric ako hapa, yeye anapendanga kusema kitu yake penye aliweka mtu asishike, hata kama unaona it's badly placed, just leave it there. So when you're able to set those boundaries and when you're able to communicate them, someone else is able to like identify you kulingana na venye umeset boundaries zako. And in conclusion, setting healthy boundaries is a crucial part of life and an important aspect of any self-care practice. Someone who's not used to setting boundaries might feel guilty or selfish when they first start out, but setting boundaries is necessary for mental health and well-being. Appropriate boundaries can look very different depending on the setting, and it's important to set them in all aspects of one's life. While setting boundaries is crucial, it is even more crucial to respect the boundaries that others have set for themselves. This goes for parents, children, romantic partners, bosses, co-workers, and anyone who interacts with or has power over anyone else. Respect is a two-way street, and appreciating the boundaries others have set for themselves is as important as setting boundaries for oneself. And on that note, I finish my presentation and I open the floor to any more additions, questions, or any other concerns. Asanteni. So questions, concerns, subtractions. I can see Eric saying, Frank, such people's behaviors are enabled by us because they face no consequence. It is much like a child who does mischief and isn't reprimanded. And yes, I agree. Venye tu tulisema, it's important kuambia wase consequences if wavuke boundaries zako, and it's also important to actually actualize those consequences so that mtu aone next time they cannot take advantage of you. And then positive behavior, and you will grow, that's a plus. Those limits zitakufanya make steps in life. I think Kevin was trying to say that having or rather setting those healthy boundaries will develop positive behavior and will also make you make good steps in life. I assume so. So any more contribution, subtraction, concerns before we finish? Yes, Basil?
I think that ukiona like mse, let's say ameviolate boundaries zako, but ako genuinely sorry, like ana apologize. I think you should give them a second chance, but like akiviolate ile consistently, like na maybe unaweza cut off ties naye. I think unaweza cut off too, to avoid more trouble between you guys, like maybe hadi inaweza get physical. Yeah, that's all. Asante.
Thank you so much, Basil, for that addition. And yes, I agree. Of course, when mtu amevuka mpaka, especially for the first time, they might be not knowing ulikuwa umeset that boundary, but let's assume alikuwa anajua. Of course, at the first time unaweza msamehea, but if it's something consistent, then now let them face the consequences that you've set for the same. Thank you, Basil, for that. Any more contributions? The silence means tuko sawa. So I have shared a post survey link kwa chat box. I request that muijaze before we finish the meeting. Thank you, Collins and Sarah, for acknowledging Momelan more on boundaries. So once you finish filling in the post survey form, niambie hapo, just raise your hand ama type done. It's important we get your feedback because your feedbacks ndio zinatusaidianga pia tunajua what other areas to explore and what other topics are to engage in. So it's important that we all fill in the post survey forms. So as we fill in the post survey form, I'd like to thank everyone who joined the session today. I believe that we've learned from each other, and I believe that kuna mengi pia tungetaka kusema, but because of time, we have to stop there. I hope you will join us next time also. We usually have our Zoom sessions on Thursday, most times. If it's not like every week, we have them like bi-weekly. So we share our posters on our social media platforms. So you can follow our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, all under Nzumari Africa. In addition to that, we also have free counseling sessions that we offer. And through our social media platforms, you can be able to reach out to us so that you may have access to all other informations that you may need. Nawashukuru tena sana for joining us, and we can now conclude our session and officially say goodbyes. So you can unmute yourself, mkisema bye as we leave the session. I hope we are filling in the post survey forms kindly.